All the energy, all the competitive fire, all the leadership, all the like a kid in a candy store.
Good afternoon, everybody. That was Jim Harbaugh on the In the Trenches podcast talking about JJ McCarthy. We're ready to get things underway on this Friday here on the Maize and Blue Review. Afternoon live, weekdays at 1 o'clock. I'm Dennis Fithian. We're a part of Rivals.com. We're talking about the latest in Michigan sports. And to do that, it's great to have on the senior editor of TMBR, and that is Brandon Justice, who joins us here. And you see him on his cell phone. I was having a technical difficulty wiring him through, the mass board here and turning the variable resistors and everything else. But he has been able to technically figure it out. We just look at him kind of like Adam Schefter. I know he's going to be getting some negative press here, Brandon, but kind of like Adam Schefter. You're on your phone, but you're here. You won't let it. You won't disappoint the masses, man. You're with us. How are you doing? Let me make sure I turn you up there. There you are.
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Let me turn my music off. There you go. I'm doing good. Hey, it's great to have you on. And I noticed that there were some people that were Michigan fans that they were upset with how Michigan. I've seen it. Twitter's not. I know nothing against Elon Musk and everything today, but Twitter's not. I don't know if it's the best gauge, for Michigan fans. But they were concerned about Michigan's recruiting here. Do you feel like there's a case for Michigan fans to be concerned with how they're doing in recruiting right now?
Well, I know that around this time last year and even into September, October, they felt the same. And when signing day came up, everything figured itself out. So I tend to understand that Michigan's strategy is typically more long-term than it is short-term, right? They have a list of guys that they like, and that list is it's not volatile, but it changes, and like any other schools would. And so early momentum is sometimes dangerous in recruiting, just the nature of decommitments and how season success and lack thereof can affect a recruit's mind, coaches moving around, et cetera. So, a lot of people overplay the whole if he's verbally committed, he's not actually committed, line of thinking. And Acuna has entered the broadcast studio, as he always does. My cat, you're new here.
Good to see him.
He likes to meow. But, people like to overplay the narrative that verbal commitments aren't real commitments. However, there is something there that does happen more often now than ever before in recruiting. And so where teams are at right now in April shouldn't be of concern to anyone, in my opinion, because I don't see Arkansas finishing as a top 5 class.
No.
We can keep scrolling. We'll see some more. I don't see Penn State finishing top 5, or I definitely don't see Louisville finishing top 5, right? So it's one of those things where momentum in the early goings in recruiting, it's not a tell of what you're going to see in the end. And recruiting, like football, it doesn't matter until the end, right? Like the score right now doesn't matter. It's a long-term thing, especially nowadays. So Michigan is long playing it with a lot of these kids, and I understand that. But Michigan is not a pressure recruiting staff. It hasn't been. They don't push kids. It's just never been their MO. And it's not what you hear from kids. And sure, we can make the argument that they should be in certain cases, because sometimes it looks like they don't want to recruit a kid, when really they're just trying to give that kid the space he deserves. But in this renaissance of recruiting over the past 10 years, where it's become a like, hey, let's go now type of game, doesn't play well into Michigan's hands, especially right now, right? But at this point last year, Darius Clemens was an afterthought. At this point last year, Marion Walker was committed to Notre Dame. At this time last year, Mason Graham was a low-end pre-star. Now he's the most impactful guy in this class thus far. So you think about those things, and you I mean, Alex Orji was committed to Virginia Tech. The list really goes on, right? You think about these things, and it should ease your mind. It should slow things down for you. It should make you understand that this is like any other year for Michigan in recruiting, where they're thinking more long term. They're setting foundations right now for the first signing day, and I think that's similar. We don't see Alabama on that list.
No.
You really think Alabama's not going to show up in the top 10? Come on.
No, I would bet that they would show up in the top 10. I think people get worried when you just don't have a 4 or 5 star that just recently committed. Actually, they had the Andrew Rappelier kid who decommitted. Right. He was a 4-star, and then they picked up a 3-star, which doesn't just get the fans buzzing. What would get fans buzzing would be Dante Moore, and this is the Michigan's top target, correct?
So things have changed over the past month, maybe 2 months, with Dante Moore, where Notre Dame has really equipped itself with a lot of momentum in the race for Moore. I don't think it's over by any means, but Notre Dame is certainly the favorite right now, I believe, whereas Michigan was for a long time. And why it's come to that point? Well, Marcus Freeman took over Notre Dame. He's an excellent recruiter. And one of his priorities when taking over was making sure that Moore was a priority. And I used priority twice there on purpose because that's exactly what happened. And the press for Moore from Notre Dame has impressed Dante. And in doing so, has given them a lead in this race. And although Michigan fans, being that Moore is from Michigan and in-state, and one of the better recruits the state has seen in a long time, and probably the best quarterback recruit it's seen since probably Devin Gardner. Obviously Moore means a lot to them. However, from Michigan's side of things internally, while Moore is certainly on top of their quarterback chart for this class, losing out would not be the ultimate detriment to this class. Without him, they can still like build something good in this class. You can see certain things happening there that I think are going to be long developed, and we'll talk about another time. Probably some things we can't exactly put out there yet, but there's some things that I think are taking shape there in that class with quarterbacks that we haven't seen yet that we'll see long term. So the more race isn't over necessarily. I don't think that Michigan is completely lost out. I just think Notre Dame has the momentum right now to be an unarguable favorite, and long term, you continue to think about that. Now, quarterbacks are least likely to decommit out of any position. They're typically the leaders of the class, right? So they typically stick unless they are, the school takes a higher ranked prospect there. Usually one of those scenarios. So it's likely that if Moore were to commit, he'd probably stay committed. However, if there's an early commitment for him out of state, there's nothing wrong with thinking that Michigan could make a late push there and do some things. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where things are at right now with Moore. It's changed over time. I think Marcus Freeman has done a terrific job with Notre Dame, and as we all expected on the recruiting trail. And it's evident here with the race for Moore.
Well, less could be more then for Michigan. Right. You're talking about those P words, press to impress. And I saw a P word this week that I'm interested in, and up on the screen for those who are just listening on the podcast, I have the screenshot of Rivals position group for not this upcoming year, which is Dante Moore's class, the following year, which is the 2024s, if you're following along. And when you said priority, Notre Dame made Moore a priority. Julian Sayin was just in South Bend. He was in Ann Arbor over the last 2 weeks, I think, as well. He is ranked as the number 2 pro-style quarterback in 2024, and he came away saying that Michigan was making him the priority, which if you're a Michigan fan, you say, okay, that's great. But then you just look right underneath here, CJ Carr, with both of his grandpas being in the College Football Hall of Fame. His dad went to Michigan as a quarterback. His one grandfather is Michigan's all-time interception leader in season, career, and is in the College Football Hall of Fame, like I said. And his dad, or his grandpa, Lloyd Carr, you would think that that he would be ticketed to Michigan. What did you make with the priority line here for Julian Sayin. That confused me a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a situation where you could see both of them come to. I don't think Michigan's going to land Sayin in the long term, but Zach Libby was down in Texas and got conversations at will there, and while he was there, was also working on a Sayin kid from California, and got that quote from him. And while I do believe that Michigan would prioritize him, I don't long term see him ending up here. However, there is a chance that they both end up here, and there's more details to that, but I do think there is a chance long term that they both end up here. I'm not going to say that that's the most likely scenario. It's not, but it's not impossible for that to happen for some reasons that we'll talk about down the road. And my cat just jumped on the table. Thankfully, you didn't have to see that. But the situation there is interesting, and I think it's long developing, and I think it's something we're going to have to keep an eye on, and we have been as a staff, but I mean, as fans too, you guys should all keep an eye on that situation. I think it's an interesting one to say the least. So, with Sayin, it's one of those things where it's similar to like a JT Daniels situation where there's definitely rooted interest there, and it's realistic interest. He's interested in the program academically. He's interested in the program athletically, obviously, with the success they had coming off of last year. There's legitimate interest there, but it's still an outside looking in scenario when you're talking realistically. And we just talked about how there's that interest from kids a lot more now in April, May, and then you get to like September, October, November, and all of a sudden it's two schools and you're kind of out of it. I mean, how often have we talked about Michigan with a kid who's, either really good or lower rated? It doesn't matter. Either way, you hear about kids that they're closing in on or entering a final group at this time of the year, and then fall comes and they either pull themselves out of it, or, the kid cuts them off and goes to a top 2 or 3 or whatever, and it doesn't include it. It happens all the time. So I think Sayin's one of those situations where I think he's really interested now. Now, that's simply just reading trends. I mean, I don't know the kid personally, so this could long-term play out differently. It's just how it's happened in the past, and I wouldn't be shocked to see it happen again here soon.
What you're saying is stay tuned.
You're waiting on that one.
I've been. I can't get away from it. I put a post up on the Wolverine Den this morning about Michigan and if there's reason to be concerned, not to be concerned. And there's a lot of reasons that I put up that you potentially could be concerned about Michigan in recruiting right now. And, Michigan won the Big Ten and the players aren't exactly lining up to commit. We just talked about Dante Moore, Sayin, and Carr. But I think one of the biggest reasons that like Michigan fans overall here, we also talked about the recent decommitment and just getting a 3-star, but Michigan being ranked 4th in the Big Ten East recruiting rankings with Michigan State being above them, that never plays out really well for people. And then the lack of star attendance, I think, has people a little bit at least concerned at this point. I wanted to read some of the I'll do this quickly here for you, but there's Good Vibes said it's disappointing so far and it doesn't make sense. He goes over what Michigan did and he says it's not translating into this cycle. NIL problem? He doesn't think so. He thinks something else is going on. Maybe Harbaugh's flirtation with the NFL. And then this part is the one that resonated with me. The one thing that makes zero sense is the fact that Michigan ran for over 3,000 yards last year, looks to have an outstanding O-line for the next several years, and yet none of the elite backs appear to even have the least bit of interest. They'd rather line up to play at Ohio State and throw the ball 50 times a game. That is bizarre. Is that bizarre to you with what Good Vibes is laying down there?
I mean, I understand where he's coming from. I get it. They expect Michigan to have the success on the field translate to recruiting immediately. And when it comes down to it, Michigan has guys that they, evaluate, and they see them as a certain type of player. And they knew when they offered Cole Cabana that was going to be a guy that they were probably going to be able to get when they offered him. And they evaluated that situation at this time of the year and think about it. They're not getting the early commitments out of the 5-stars. They're getting the early commitments out of the lower end prospects. Why do you think that is? Probably because they see that prospect blowing up in the long term. If they're able to get him now, they don't have to stave off the bigger players. Cole Cabana wasn't a guy they had to fight off against Ohio State and Texas and et cetera, et cetera. that they see him as a guy that they might have had to do that with long term. Samaj Morgan, same thing. Raylan Wilson's kind of an anomaly. I mean, when that kid says he wants to commit, you just take him. He's one of the better players in the class, right? So it's one of those things where you have to understand that, like it or not, Michigan's going to evaluate how they're going to evaluate. They're not going to fall in love with every 5-star, right? So they're not going to recruit the heck out of a kid that they would rather spend that time recruiting a kid that's going to have vetted interest in them that they don't see as a downgrade in comparison. Or maybe they do see him as a downgrade, but it's not a strong enough downgrade to convince them of spending time elsewhere, right? So if that makes sense, I'm trying my best to explain the trends of recruiting because it's year in and year out, right? And I understand that success you want to translate immediately to recruiting success. I'm sorry, on-field success to recruiting success. However, Michigan has always had this sort of pace to them when they're recruiting, and you can call it. Seems like a Harbaugh pass down thing. But with Albert Karshnia coming in and with that team he has with Campbell and Denard, this is the strategy they've taken. They're going to evaluate how they want to evaluate, and like it or not, they're going to recruit the kids that they're evaluating at that level. And they've recruited differently than the Blue Bloods or whatever you want to call them for years now. They had stars on stars in 2016. They didn't win the Big Ten championship with that team. They won the Big Ten championship with the team that had the identity, right? So they're focused on that, maybe not more so than skill, but they're focused on it and in that combination, that hybrid. And those are two things they look for. They want guys that want to come in and play the style of football they played last year, the hard-nosed, everyone against everyone type of football. And so they consider how this kid is going to morally affect the program as much as he's going to athletically. And that matters to them because they're team building, they're program building. They're not just putting a team on paper. They're putting a team on the field and they're coaching them. So it's a whole different thing. We get caught up in rankings, and I understand that rivals is that's how we built this thing. So I get it. However, we have to consider what they're doing. They're not putting a video game together and putting 5 stars in a simulation. They're coaching them. They're playing actual games. And they've seen a team full of stars be lackluster in big moments. We can talk about certain effort problems they've had with 5 stars and 4 stars in the past. It happens. All right. It wasn't a secret that Tariq Black took plays off. We saw that, right? You didn't see that this past year with this team. You don't see Mikey Sanders still going out there and taking plays off. Was Mikey Sanders still a high recruit? No. But does he look like he's going to be an effective nickelback for them, possibly a 3-way player this year? Yes. Yes, he does. Was Cade McNamara that's highly sought-after, recruit? No. He was decently. I mean, Alabama was there, but they were there. That was about it, right? He was basically betting on being a Mac Jones there, which is few and far. So at that point, you have to consider Cade McNamara just won the Big Ten. Shea Patterson was like it, right? He was it when he came in. And even though he wasn't, they did spend all their high school recruiting time on him too. And even though they didn't get him, ultimately they did. And they still invested a lot of time in bringing him there and then gave him the job, right? So, and he wasn't able to win it. It's not all on him, but it's just things like that where there's been stars here. It's not like Michigan has missed out on good recruiting classes. They've had good recruiting classes. And the team that won it was seen as their worst, the 2018 class, with Aiden Hutchinson at the top and Hassan Haskins at the bottom. It's funny how that works. So I'll continue to go back to that and with these references because I do understand where guys like, or women, whoever it is, good vibes comes from. I get it because the line of thinking makes sense. But a line of thinking can't rely solely on paper. The program building, the team building, the program, it's bigger than that. And there's things that matter beyond it, beyond just being a 4 or 5 star or whatever. So I hope that if Good Vibes watches this, it makes sense to them because I do get where they're coming from. But, meet me in the middle here. Hear me out.
It's good perspective. I'm recruiting could drive you crazy. Like if we're sitting here just talking about it, I would like Michigan to be like Georgia and just bring in nothing but 5 stars. And I know that's not realistic, but I would like them, especially after a top 10 class this year, thinking, oh yeah, why not get into the top 5? You would think that would only help them. And yet guys like Ronnie Bell and Haskins, those are the guys I root for the most because, they didn't come in with a 5 star. So that's weird on my part. Somebody agreeing with you is Zach Libby, who is a recruiting reporter. I'll just read the first sentence or two. When I asked him if there's reasons to be concerned right now, he said it's April, not even the end of April. Now, if we were in the dog days of the regular season, then I'd be concerned. But with official visits yet to commence, spring camps for the Southern schools still underway, and the national showcases continuing to be in full swing, there's so much time left for Michigan fans not to be concerned. All right, so there's a part of what he had to say. He sounds like he's in the same line of thinking with you, so that's good.
Yeah, and I just, it's timing. They've always recruited this way, so I don't know. I'm just I'm one to think about this the same way that I've always thought about it with this program, because I've seen it happen so many years in a row, right? So start covering the team in 2016. So you the first class was 2015 class. I mean, they were all built, I guess, differently in a way. But when 2018 came, you kind of saw that strategy not really repeat itself, but evolve with that foundation in mind, that they were going to recruit, human beings as much as they were going to recruit student athletes, which was always an ideology Harbaugh had. Same thing in the NFL. However, now it's just far more implemented because they've seen it come to life, right? Now they can really, it's like selling, we always talked about how Harbaugh was quote unquote selling hope his first year because he hadn't had any, record. Right? He hadn't played a game yet, and they were trying to recruit guys to a program that had at that point become largely a doormat in the conference. So now they preceded that, that's over with. I think even in 2016, they moved on from that narrative. But now as a staff, I think that they can look back on that 2018 class and they can look at, they're not really, I don't mean selling by selling recruits. I just mean they have that belief now as a staff. They've seen it come to life. So it works for them. It's proven. And so they can continue to recruit that way with confidence. And I don't want this to make anyone think that I don't think they're going to get any 5-stars. Like Will Johnson is still on this roster. Keon Sabb is still on this roster. Derek Moore is still on this roster, right? Like Darius Clemens was a highly rated recruit. He's on the roster. Andrew Gentry is on the roster. That's a number 68 overall prospect, borderline 5-star type of player, 6.0 Rivals rating, which is about a point away from being that 5-star. So they have guys, and they're going to continue to get guys that are at that level. Dax Hill was on this roster last year. Yes, Aiden Hutchinson was a highly touted recruit. He wasn't a kind of guy that Alabama had at the top of this class, though, and that's where you expect conference and playoff champions to be, and that's what Michigan was. Did they win the national championship? No. So now it's kind of about taking that next step. So I do think that they need to add a little oregano to the mix here, a little spice, and get a couple more guys, and that's what they expect to do. But I don't think that not having them right now is a concern. If the season comes and they have a similar season to last year, maybe they don't win the conference, but let's just say hypothetically we get to fall and they still don't have a 5-star and the season hasn't started yet, they're still riding off the coattails of last year, then yeah, at that point, maybe sure. But we have to see, I think Zach made a good point, as he always does. We got to see what the official visits are. You should expect a lot of 5- and 4-star high-profile guys to line up for officials at Michigan this year. At that point, it's like, if we get there and there's still no official visitors, then we'll be concerned. But that's not, I don't see that happening. Michigan hosts top-end recruits years where they've been, brutal. They had, the year they went 2-4, they had high-profile recruits. So, to me, it's just one of those things where people are always going to be victims of the moment, and there's nothing wrong with it because I see where they're coming from as fans. They've been waiting on this for so long that they want to see this perfect aftermath. And the fact that it hasn't happened is troubling, and I understand it from an instant gratification perspective. But from a long-term perspective, if Michigan had 4 or 5 stars committed right now, I guarantee you they wouldn't have 4 or 5 stars committed at the end of the year. Probably, less, not in a good way. They would have less. That's just how this recruiting game goes. And then they know that with the high-profile kids. So again, I think the best point I can make is they're taking guys like Cabana early because those are guys they see exploding later. Think about Jimmy Rolder. He's a guy that exploded super late, right? And they didn't take him early, but he's just a good example of a guy that exploded super late. It took him until his senior year. So, I think that they know what they're doing when they're taking guys like him. And you're not going to. And again, their strategy has never been ever under Harbaugh to push kids to commit on the spot or push kids to commit here, there, whatever. Right? It's always been a slower play, not in a bad way, just in we're going to let this kid think on his own type of deal. That doesn't happen elsewhere all the time. So
sorry about that. I've got 3 quick things for you. Feedback, basketball, and baseball. You can go for as short or long as you want. Antoine on the feedback says, yes, Michigan has done a great job with selectively getting scheme fit players. He says they're getting lower tier guys or under the radar guys that have high ability but need to be taught proper technique. So
Antoine's agreeing with me. That's
yes.
exciting to see. Thanks, sir.
He is agreeing with you. And
first time in a while.
The basketball side, the transfer portal is a real thing. What's going on there. And yesterday or last night, locally, a player jumped into that portal, one of the greatest scorers in college basketball history. And not an exaggeration there. And Antoine Davis, who plays at UAD, he's into the portal. And so would Michigan take a look at him? Outstanding scorer. You look at his field goal percentage, his 3-point field goal percentage. They're not great, but you start looking at that points per game, a flat out scorer, no doubt about that. Would Michigan be interested in a guy like Antoine Davis? What do you think?
Well, I think that Michigan would be highly interested in a guard that can shoot 38% from 3. I think they would welcome that, even though it's not maybe fantastic, but I think they would take that for sure. But I think you're right. Any guy that's going to deliver you 24 points a game is worth looking at, especially for Michigan, because you think about what they were missing in that Villanova game. Like, we're going to say this forever, Dennis. They had that game won. All they had to do was make some bunnies, like we say, and they were under the rim, easy baskets that just didn't fall that day. They had no business losing that game by as little as they did. They should have lost it by 20 or 30. However, if they were capable of hitting open shots, they probably would have won it by a decent amount, right? So you think about that game. You think about games during the regular season where Michigan envisioned Caleb Houston being that guy. They envisioned having Houston to be the scorer. And they saw themselves as a 3-level team with, the guy at the top, and they had, with Devontae Jones at the top, and they had the scorer in Houston, and they had Dickinson down low. That's what they saw. They saw 3 levels there. That didn't come to fruition the way they wanted it to, right? Jones didn't really catch fire until the end, and by the time he caught fire, he got hurt. And by the time he got hurt, he wasn't playing nearly as good as he was before. They saw something from Frankie Collins, but Frankie Collins is while a terrific point guard, not a scorer, not a guy that you're going to expect to be that scorer for you on the outside. He's not going to trade Burke your offense. Now, many people will, granted. However, he's far more of a playmaker and defensive guy. So Antoine Davis, I feel like, fills that gap. Now, where you asked about if Michigan's going to pursue or not, that's probably a great question for Josh Henschke, who knows a lot about those things. But as for me, I think just from looking at the build of the roster, you just have to consider, does Michigan think that they're going to get out of Caleb Houston this year or next year what they did not get this past year? Because Davis would probably not play his position, but he would play that role. Like, he would be a shooter. So I am one to think that in basketball, you can't have too many shooters. So you would welcome this guy with open arms, and you would meritocracy it like Jim Harbaugh, and just let everybody play it out, and whoever's good's good and whoever's not's not. Right? Zeb Jackson stepping out mid-year last year was tough, right? I don't know if that's anyone's fault necessarily, but you have that open spot, right? So I think that Davis is a no-brainer if he wants to come here. I'm not sure if he wants to come to Michigan. I don't really have any intel there. However, in the event that he is, I think if you're Michigan and you're Juwan Howard, you welcome anybody that can score that many points a game. You have to, right? I know they're looking at the big man from Utah State or Utah, wherever that is. I think it's an even smaller school in Utah. So I know that there's some things they're looking at in the portal. Do they have enough room? That's another question. Can they make enough room? I'm not one to cut kids on your current roster to take other ones. That's just a morality thing. Because what message does that send to the rest of your roster? Now, if it's a guy that's kind of an outlier that hasn't worked and just isn't going to make sense, or let's just say it's a better situation for him to go elsewhere, he's going to play more elsewhere, then that makes sense, right? If it's a morally objective thing, which I think Juwan Howard is. So I don't think it would be a situation like that. So if it makes sense to them, then yes. From my perspective, it absolutely does. I think you would agree too, right? I mean, it feels like a no-brainer.
Well, the only part that's not a no-brainer is that he's 6'1", and that's for any, and he's a scoring, I guess you'd say, point guard. as a shooting guard. It reminds me of would you take Allen Iverson on your team? Well, yeah, take it would be better if he was like in the Ray Allen mold, somebody a Klay Thompson, like Michigan.
Right. Oh, yeah,
if you could ask Michigan fans what they would want the most, you'd say, give me a 6'4" shooting guard that can just fill it up from 3-point range. Well, okay, yeah, that's perfect. I would like to play every poker hand with pocket aces, but sometimes you get in there with jacks, or you go with ace jack or something like that, and that's what Antoine Davis. He's like a pair of kings, So yeah, he's not a pair of aces, but yeah, I think you would take him. I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
Brandon,
absolutely.
Go ahead. The last thing I wanted to ask you, unless you had something else you wanted to say on basketball.
Oh, no problem.
Well, you're a baseball guy, and it's been a couple days here, but here it is. I got a picture of Clayton Kershaw up there. If you would have polled Kershaw Wednesday, 7 perfect innings, pitch count of 80. You love the game of baseball. This would have been, there's only been 23 perfectos in the history of Major League Baseball. It's early. Kershaw's 34 years old. He's had issues with his arm here. What would you have done if you were Dave Roberts? What would have done if you had that Dodger blue manager hat on and you were calling the shots?
Yeah, I think you got to think logically, not emotionally, especially in the first week of the season. And you said it best. I mean, 34 years old, 80 pitches in June is not a lot, but 80 pitches in April is when you're at that age, and you have that wear and tear. I mean, the dude's been starting for a dozen years now for the Dodgers, and he's done it really well. And I don't think you want to, affect that for the long term. So I think you think long term, and I think that's what Roberts is doing. I think Kershaw knew that was going to happen, right? He's put himself on this regimen, and the Dodgers have recommended it to him, and he's accepted it, and so on and so forth. So he wasn't like he was unaware. It wasn't like Blake Snell getting pulled in the playoffs for the Rays. That was a different controversy. Yeah. Right. So that's another conversation. Now the Rays they think differently than anybody in baseball. They're kind of like the modern day Billy Bean A's, I think, in a way. But when it comes to the Kershaw situation, it's cut and dry. It's black and white. He was on a count. His count was up. It's April. All right. Now it's baseball and it's romantic and you want to get emotional about it and naturally, and you should. It's a beautiful game.
It sucks for baseball, but
right.
You understand.
And so I understand why people were upset, but you have to take a seat, take a breath, and think about if you are not only if you're the Dodgers, not only if you want to keep your maybe he's not their ace anymore, but he still has that ace for it. I mean, he just went 7 innings perfect, so he could still be an ace by any means. However, think about it from his perspective. Like, this guy wants to play. This guy wants to make money playing. And you go 100 pitches in that game, or you go 95 to 100 pitches in that game. I think was that his first outing or second? Probably his second outing.
Yeah.
That's risking some wear and tear already on top of it. And then you think about what that could lead to. And the arm is always a slippery slope. So it could lead to another Tommy John. If a TJ happens to him at 34, that's probably it for him, right? So you got to think about those things. And you have to think worst case scenario in baseball. You have to. We just lost our best player to a shoulder injury on a swing.
Yeah,
so,
I thought about it first I thought about it as a baseball fan, of course. I wanted to see him go out there and do it, push the envelope, hopefully nothing happens. But, that's not realistic. And, of course, if you're Roberts, you understand where he's coming from. But then I thought, what if I was a Dodgers fan? If I was a Dodgers fan, it's like, okay, hey, that's great. If it was in June or something in July, those things would be nice. But, we're trying to win a World Series here. We want him for the postseason. We don't want, Roberts throwing him out there for 110 pitches here in the second outing just to try to get a perfect game. You have to be smarter than that. So I bet all Dodgers fans thought about it just like that. Outside of LA, a lot of different conversations, but inside of LA, and those are the ones like who's invested in that team. What's your ultimate goals? You put all that together where you're at, and then you say, okay, you understand. Even though you hate it ultimately for the game, you'd love to see
it's the same thing. When you play league baseball in high school. So, for example, we have a league that we've played in for forever. Same league we've always been in. And our biggest rival has won it the past 5 years. And, before he got injured, Our best hitter was also our best pitcher, and we weren't going to throw him against them in the regular season because we draw them first round of districts in playoffs. So we were sacrificing putting our, ace on. He's also a shortstop, so it's hard to call him an ace because you want him in both spots at the same time in a perfect world. But we were sacrificing not throwing our ace in what was a league could have been a league deciding type of game for the betterment of the long term because it was more important for us to advance the playoffs, right? So same line of thinking. So fully agree with you.
Good stuff. All right. Sorry for my connection issues. We'll work that on. But totally you're a pro with the phone in your hand. So, all right.
It. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Yeah,
have a great weekend. We can't wait to talk with you again. See you later.
Appreciate it.
There he is, Brandon Justice.